Welcome back to the Preventable. We're a few episodes in. We still haven't figured it out. But we're here today with an esteemed guest. His name is John Gall. He is a great friend of the organization. Really is, in my opinion, one of the most effective spokespeople and mouthpieces for why we need to be paying attention to mental health. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's quite an honor.
So I got to kind of dig in. So you are a carpenter by trade. How long were you doing that? What got you into carpentry? Tell me about where you started.
Well, I actually started in the residential sector. I was working non-union, and I was able to take some night courses in cabinet making, so I actually moved into the cabinet making sector. And at that point, I was working for a tool and die company, and the owner of the tool and die firm saw some of my work and said, "Why don't you start building our shipping containers for international product?" They were pretty nice shipping containers.
I was going to say, okay, cabinets to shipping containers.
So I was like, I'm like 19 or 20 years old. And I said, I'm doing this stuff at night at school. He said, well, just start your own company. I was like, yeah, okay. I said,
sure.
I didn't have that kind of capital at that age. And he's like, just buy what you need on the credit card. Give me the bill. And what I'll do is start taking delivery. And let's just say whatever you bill me that week, I'll hold back 10%. And that's how you'll pay me back, no interest. And so that's how I really kind of got started into this whole area of construction. And about 6-9 months into that, a friend of me said, hey, a friend of mine, I was out of high school. A lot of friends from high school were playing in adult CYC soccer and softball teams. And at softball season, my friend said to me, hey, we have an opening for a carpenter apprentice, but it's right up your alley because you'll be in the shop as a cabinet maker. So he said, you get the best of both worlds. You'll be able to be a cabinet maker and make carpenter wages. And I couldn't pass it up. So I started that in about August, September of 79 and graduated about April of 82. And was really fortunate to work for a great firm, Henges Associates. Ron Henges recently passed away. Certainly one of my biggest supporters, and I always considered a friend and a mentor. One of the kindest people I've ever met in my life, and was a great Northern Star for me. And so he gave me, the opportunity to spread my wings.
I have to ask, how are the cabinets in your house? Did you make them?
Some of the furniture I've made, but
okay.
No. By the time house buying came around and family and all that kind of stuff, I had moved on. So I was running some work, had an opportunity to go teach.
Oh.
And it was really in my apprenticeship program where I learned how to learn. I love learning.
Which would explain why you've continued learning. Yes,
that's right.
Okay.
That's right. So, as a high school student, I probably was a pain to my mother and father. I was on 4 years probation my first month of high school. So, so
the truth comes out, folks.
Yeah. So
I knew I liked you, John.
So it truly was my apprenticeship program where
Yeah.
I learned how to learn, and I just loved it, and I couldn't stop.
Well, and so then I know over the years you really morphed into lots of different roles, and ultimately you retired as Director of Training and Workforce Development for the local carpentry union.
That's correct.
So I guess some of our listeners might be wondering, why am I talking to you? Right? So my dad was in construction, ran a construction company, and I can tell you we never talked about mental health. So why would I have you here? What brings you to the table?
Well, I in 18 minutes, I can't really explain all that, but I'll do my best. About 20 years ago, researchers from WashU School of Medicine came to me and asked if they could start doing some research collaboratively with the carpenters, especially our apprentices. And we actually went after the low-hanging fruit. They came to us and said, if we can find ways to tweak your training so that things are done safer out on the job site, more of your workers will come
like
home.
OSHA stuff.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
makes
Yep.
sense.
The
Yep.
low-hanging fruit, slips, trips, and falls. That's
Yep.
where we
Trips
started.
and falls. Okay.
Then we moved to nail guns because one study led to the other.
Nail guns.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah.
All
We
right.
found from the slips, trips, and falls study that it was the early term apprentices who were getting hurt with nail guns.
Huh.
And we said to ourselves, why are we putting a pneumatic nailer that shoots a 3.5-inch metal spike at 120 psi in somebody's hand who is less than a month on the job? And it was because,
It's a good question.
anybody can do that.
Right.
That was the flavor of the day.
Huh.
Well, hell, anybody can do that. So essentially we realized that no, we needed more training in that area in order to stop people from shooting themselves in the foot, in the eye, or their friend in the leg, and all those kinds of things. And if you ever been through our school down there in Afton, you'll see pictures of these accidents on the wall of fame or shame, whatever you want to call it.
Sorry, that's not funny.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
No, but I tell you, we knew a couple of things. And one of the things we knew was that us, whether it was the Carpenters Union or the apprenticeship program, which is a jointly managed organization, us going to the manufacturers wasn't going to change things. But when you had WashU School of Medicine with MDs and PhDs behind your name, that might change the game.
Right.
And in fact, it did.
It shouldn't take that.
I know.
But it does.
It did.
Right.
And it did. So they actually were able to use their science in their peer-reviewed journal published studies to change the way nailers were sent out of the factory. They used to send them with a contact trip nailer trigger on them, and they actually moved it to the sequential trip trigger. So
You've lost me.
well,
but that's
a
okay.
contact, all you had to do is touch the nose of the gun and a nail popped out. But a sequential, you had to depress the nose and then pull the trigger for a nail to come out.
Okay.
So you can imagine it on a contact trip, if you hit a knot, you could actually bounce that nose off that nail you just put in there and shoot that other nail off in a ricochet and hurt somebody else, and other than yourself. So sequential slowed the thing down a little bit and gave you a little more time to pause and think, And so anyway, so those studies were going on. We were moving along, really nice. We actually moved into some space of dealing with training for apprentices, and then the apprentices came back to report that even though our methods may be safer, the people in the field, their upper echelon, wouldn't accept them. So then we knew we had to do a study on how do we get management and the people out on the job site to understand the science so they would accept these new fangled methods the apprentices were trying to attempt to show out on the job site. And so this moved on and it worked. And then all of a sudden 2007 comes along, 2008. And you know what that was? That was the Great Recession.
Yes.
And this disturbed a lot of people in more ways than one. And one of the things I saw in our apprentices down at the school was actually a state of melancholy.
Just sadness.
You could see it in their faces, in their movement, in their body language. And I just knew that we were not addressing the whole person. And so when I went back to the WashU researchers, they said there's actually a term for that. It's called total worker health. And so I knew that in some ways, in order to win people over, because there's such a stigma tied to this issue of mental health, that we weren't going to upfront be able to frame it as mental health. Right. And so a lot of us, got together and talked it over, and not just here locally. Some of the input I got was from an international organization called the IFEBP, and they actually had consultants from actuaries to accountants to lawyers, and we decided that we had to focus on financial literacy because that's a mental health issue. And to me, I couldn't, push it hard enough or fast enough
Well,
because,
because if it weren't for that, you wouldn't be where you were, right?
well,
If you didn't have somebody helping you kind of set up a business plan,
yep,
taking a chance on you and encouraging you to go into business for yourself.
yes,
I mean,
yep.
financial literacy is key.
Oh, and to me, you know, not trying to sound, like anti-capitalist here, but let's face the facts. When you're young like that, money can become the root of all evil.
Oh,
So
preach.
if
Yes.
you're not prepared to deal with that influx of money as you get those raises in the trades,
Mm-hmm.
you may squander it, and then you don't realize why you've got all these problems. And so, if we could just introduce financial literacy, maybe that would take one less thing off their table, and create some good space in their relationships. And so, we moved in that direction, and
Mm-hmm.
we were able finally to reframe it as a mental health agenda. And then next thing you know, as you well know, the opioid crisis comes along.
Yes, sir.
And so, a dear friend of mine from high school, who was was at the time was a labor leader, Don Willie with Labor's Local 110. He and I go back to high school. We ran track together. Don lost his son in March of 2016, and he lost him to the a heroin overdose. And it broke my heart that I did not know that he was dealing with those issues until afterwards, and that's too late.
And Don's for those people who don't know Don, I mean, he's a big dude.
Oh,
He's kind of what you think of when you think of like a construction guy
yeah.
that, you know, isn't super emotional, curses a lot.
Nope.
Like you could see him on a job site giving folks a hard time,
Yep.
and busting their chops. But you wouldn't necessarily expect him to be dealing with sort of emotions or to even really.
Yeah, Don was
It's hard to know when somebody's going through something like
right,
that.
right. I mean, I always looked at Don as he was a man among boys back in high school. He was always as big as the doorway.
Yeah,
He went
he's
to
a huge
Iowa and
dude.
played, got a 4-year scholarship to play football. So, that's the type of person
Mm-hmm.
he is, and just a wonderful individual. Um, kind as the day is long, but certainly somebody you want on your side in a fight.
Oh, you want him on your.
So,
He's a bulldog.
yeah,
You want him on your
yeah,
side. That's
yeah.
right.
So when that happened, I went home to my family and I said, I just feel so bad. I had a discussion at dinner with them and said, I think one of my phrases to him was, I can't imagine what he's going through. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child. And then I think every month from that point forward, he and I, throughout the remainder of 2016, went to either a workshop or conference or a summit on opioids in the workplace.
Yes.
And every time I'd come out of one of those, I was just shaking my head. I could not believe what I just learned in there.
Because for you, it was a culmination of what you were learning was that it was a culmination of some sadness and melancholy because of the recession, coupled with money.
Yep.
And all of these feelings and the inability to cope.
Yep.
Right. And so it was coming out for some
Right.
of the employees as substance use disorders.
Yeah,
Right.
but I hadn't put my finger on that
Right.
yet.
Not yet. Mm-hmm.
I just knew it was some kind of mental
Yeah.
disturbance.
You knew something was going on.
But I couldn't put my finger on it, and that moved me in the direction. And believe me, there were people on both sides of the table of labor and management that pushed back against Don and my efforts. And because of his character and my character, we didn't back down.
Yeah.
And
for the record, I'd like you on my side in a fight also.
And lo and behold, it was interesting because about December of 2016, my oldest son, John Jr., said to my wife, his mother, Mary, Mom, it seems like every time we have dinner together, Papa talks about uh, the heroin crisis. And she said, yeah. And he's like, I think it's about time we call that off limits at the dinner table. So she's like, well, why? And he said, it's a little much. And she said, well, just not unlike you, he's got the temperament where you see someone in need and then you try to help that individual. She said, and she told him, imagine, you being a father and losing your son, and somebody throwing you 100-pound sack of potatoes instead of a life preserver.
Mm.
And she says that's what it's got to feel like. She says I don't know, but I imagine that's what it's got to feel like. And then the next thing you know, 3 months later, my son, John Jr., took his life. He was, for lack of better words, a pretty good athlete in high school. And they allowed him to play soccer and football in the same season.
Mm.
And he was a running back on offense and a safety on defense, so he was getting hit on every play.
Mm.
And then he'd go from that to playing soccer, and he was a center midfielder, so he was always going up for head balls.
Mm.
And during his junior and senior year, he suffered 4 concussions, and 2 of them in his senior year, the last few weeks of the season, he had 2 knockouts about 2 weeks apart. And so he battled from about 2011 till 2017 with those demons. And
Because that was really before, it was probably right during, but mainly before we knew everything we know now about concussions and CTE. Am I saying that
right? That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And so we've read a lot and seen a lot in the press with regards to NFL players who have taken their lives.
Yes.
And their brains being donated to the brain bank up in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Ann McKee and her research team studying their brains and finding this abnormal tau protein in their brain, which is now, the disease, the brain disease is called CTE. And the concussion movie with Will Smith, where he played Dr. Bennett Omalu, actually came out in 2015. So we're on the cusp of it.
Okay.
And so I had already read up a lot about it. And essentially, when we were in the emergency room, I asked the doctors if they could salvage any of his organs. And they said no. And,
none? Not even his brain?
Well, that's what I said. I said, I know one you can salvage. And they said, what's that? And I said, his brain. And they asked me, what do I know about that? And I told them I would like to donate his brain to Dr. Bennett Omalu. And they said, well, we don't work with him, but we do work with Dr. Ann McKee. I said, we're done. Just give me the papers. And so they harvested his brain, his spinal cord, and his eyes. And Mary and I had to go through 3 rounds of interviews from later in March to beginning of December. It was a double-blind study, and they called us on December the 6th of 2017 to inform us that little John did have stage 1 CTE. There was never a doubt in my mind.
Right, you knew.
And so, how does this all tie together? Well, it ties together, Don's story and my story, because, in my opinion, a lot of us do not give a lot of thought to what's going around us in our world until it hits hits us square in the face. And so, to me, the heroin issue hit me square in the face in March of 16, and then in March of 17, the suicide issue hit me. And then when Don and I put our heads together, because he was there to walk by my side after I lost my son, And we said, hey, you know what? This stuff's going on in our own industry.
That's right.
And then what we come to find out, Nichole, as you will know, depending on what report you read, the construction industry as a sector is number one when it comes to opioid abuse.
Yes.
And it's number one or number two when it comes to suicide. And so in a very sad but odd way, it wrangled both Don and I, who have both lost, our dear sons, to these issues. And so we started to look at this issue a little more closely. We got the WashU researchers on board.
Because we want to, if people are listening to this, they're going to be saying, well, why? Why? So what, and I know you are a doctor, correct? You have your PhD. I know you're also a very humble man, but you've been doing a lot of studies on this with WashU and with other places. And so what are, I don't know, for lack of a better word, just for the people listening at home, like why construction industry? Like what puts them at a higher risk for suicide and also substance use disorders?
Well, there's a litany of issues, but let's start with the obvious. The obvious is it's still pretty much a male-dominated industry.
Okay.
So there's this aura of machoism.
Yeah, dudes don't like to talk about feelings, or at least that is the perception.
And or they don't like to show a weakness.
Yes.
And so that if you ask for help, that's a chink in your armor, and and the sharks will start swarming. And so anyway, that's one issue.
Oh, so machismo, basically.
Yes. The other issue, big issue to me, is that it truly is and always will be, as long as the pay is the way it's dealt out right now. It is a seasonal position.
So you are working while you can, and that means through pain, mental or
that's
physical.
Right. Yeah. So essentially, in construction, in the St. Louis marketplace, most of the blue-collar jobs, you only get paid for when you work. And so if you're the breadwinner, you have to put food on your table for your family. And if you're hurt, you have to figure out ways to hide that pain.
That's right.
And so many of them hit the easy button. They went to their doctor. And, of course, there's plenty of fingers to point here. The CDC, Congress, the pharmaceuticals, companies and so on and so forth. But essentially they became more lax about dispensing highly addictive drugs known as opiates and opioids. And people got hooked on them. The fact is that opioids in most cases are not for chronic pain, but we start to use them more often than not for chronic pain. And so once there became an issue, then the CDC wanted to pull back. And so these doctors were afraid, so they started cutting people off. And so now we have people who are hooked, who are addicted to a highly addictive drug, looking for their fix. And so they started to buy it on the street as a diversion, people taking it out of their,
So let me ask. So we've talked about machismo, kind of. We've talked about it being seasonal and needing to provide. And so you're working, whether you're in pain or not, and it's nice to have something to take away the pain, whatever that, is. I'd like to end. I feel like we've come really full circle here, and I hope, because I know why you're here, but I hope that everybody listening kind of understands how you started out as a carpenter building cabinets are now a man on a mission. You are a crusader. And so what are you doing about it? Because I know you personally are doing a lot. So give me like the top 3 things that you're doing right now.
Oh, goodness.
To draw attention to the challenges that people in the construction industry face, but also to try to offer some relief.
Well, currently I am consulting on 2 opioid-related grants. One with WashU, mainly focused in the St. Louis region on union construction issues, and the other one through University of Missouri, Columbia, their extension
Oh, okay.
office,
Mm-hmm.
their Rhoda grant. So that one is basically all industries across all parts of Missouri, whether union or non-union,
Hmm.
and with really a rural focus. And so,
Rural. Okay.
uh,
All right.
so the beauty of the two is that they both are focusing on opioids, but more importantly, we're trying to look at what's called RFW, recovery friendly workplaces.
Yes.
And so we don't.
That is another episode, my friend.
Yeah. Well, we don't have we. There are a lot of different models out there.
Yes.
Missouri doesn't really have one
Correct.
right now, and
They're working on it. We're working on it.
That's right. And so there are a lot of us working on this, and hopefully together and not separately. And so.
And I really am not kidding. That is a whole nother episode. And as a matter of fact, we've talked about maybe future iterations of this podcast series, like focusing on, how this really does impact the workplace and
Right.
even putting a spotlight on particular workplaces that have been really open and
As well as I know,
Yeah.
Nichole, you can't hardly pick up a paper in the last few weeks that owners and contractors aren't screaming for people. There's a labor
everyone's
shortage.
looking to
right?
hire. Yep.
Yet,
We're looking to hire.
in a
We
recent
can't find
study by
anybody.
some of our team at Mizzou Columbia, we found that there are several thousand people who are in recovery, but can't be rehired because of the barriers that are in place.
Yes.
And so we need to figure out how to remove those barriers.
Absolutely.
And so that's a big piece
That's
I'm working on.
Yep.
Doing a lot of outreach with different groups. It's not unusual for me to work with a company or a union and come in and deliver either. I have a 1 hour presentation that kind of encapsulates a pilot study that I just had published in a peer-reviewed journal with regards to wellness and well-being in the industry, in the construction industry. So I do a 1 hour piece on that. I do a big one right now that especially is important is I do a 2 hour training session on resilience.
Mm.
And if you've followed some of the latest reports about COVID and the opioids crisis, resilience is going to be a huge issue coming up here. And of course, I do a 1 hour piece, QPR piece on suicide prevention as
Which
well.
is
So
question, persuade,
and
refer. That's
correct.
right.
And I try to tailor those towards the industry sector that
Mhm.
I'm delivering. And most of what I do, because I come out of the construction sector, is with the construction sector.
Well, I can think of no other person that can really. I mean, you and Don, you're sort of a package deal many times, and again, I would definitely want both of you in a bar fight on my side. But I really can think of very few people that are doing as much boots on the ground, infiltrating and trying to completely upend norms in any industry. And the fact that you are trying to tackle it in the construction industry, which is one that I grew up in and I know how difficult of a nut that is to crack. I am so grateful for the efforts that you are undertaking. And I'm so grateful that you spent some time today talking to me about everything that you're doing, also kind of what brought you to this place. And I think that everyone listening hears that you aren't stopping anytime soon.
No, and as a matter of fact, I just took a newly created position with the Missouri FL-CIO, thanks to Jake Hummel and Greta Bax. They created a new division called Worker Wellness, and they asked me to become the Worker Wellness Director. So that's going to be a statewide effort, and it's for all workers across the entire state. So I'm really looking forward to that, because if there was ever a time we need that kind of support out there, it's
now. It's now. Thank you so much, John, for spending some time with us. If you like what you're hearing, if you want to listen to one of our upcoming episodes about recovery-friendly workplaces, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much, John. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.